world. These include services such as nutrient cycling and scavenging, things such as seed dispersal, insect pest control, pollination, and then the very popular hobby around the world, birding. However, a study in Science in 2019 has shown that billions of birds in North America have vanished over the last several decades. The study found that 2.9 billion birds have been lost since 1970. So on the bottom axis is the year, so 1970 to 2010, and on the y-axis is the amount of birds that have been lost. So starting up at the top, we see a steep decline over the past several decades. And this comes out to the equivalent of 1 in 4 birds that are gone since 1970 that we've lost. And so one of the second leading cause of bird loss is collisions with building windows. And this is an estimated 600 and up to 900 million birds each year that we're losing. So that's an annual shy of 1 billion birds, depending on which study you're looking at, that are lost. The University of Illinois is located along a major migratory pathway called the Mississippi Flyway. And this means that birds here on campus may be bottlenecked during migration over our community, potentially making the University of Illinois a danger zone. Here at the University of Illinois, we also have building designs that, while beautiful, tend to use windows that are highly reflective and very transparent. For example, in the bottom left, this is a new building going up, but what you can see is reflections in the glass of trees that are further away outside. And so when a bird is flying towards this building, what it may interpret from that reflection is that there's another tree there that the bird can fly into and land at to rest. And clearly there's not a tree that size on the inside of the building, leading to an impact with the window. Transparency, on the other hand, is a different window factor, which can be seen on the bottom right, where there are windows on both sides of this building, where a bird might think it can fly through the building, but because it can see through the glass on both sides, and thus impacts and collides with the window because it thinks it can fly through. So the first thing we wanted to do is test whether some of these buildings that are beautiful, that have a lot of windows, actually increase or cause collisions here on campus. And so the first thing we did was we created this survey where we took, this is a map of campus, and we took campus and broke it up into 3 different sections. The blue route is the north route, the red route in the middle is the main route, and the green route in the bottom is the south route. And so what we did was during fall migration of 2019, it was about a 4 to 5 week period, we had volunteers from GEEB and others who would walk these routes on each part of campus twice a day. So each route was walked once in the morning and each route was walked once in the evening. So this was a robust way to continuously survey buildings throughout the migration period, throughout the fall migration period, to collect birds and determine whether or not certain buildings were causing more bird strikes than others. And so the way we did this was when someone would walk up to a building and find a bird, we actually collected the bird because we have proper reclamation permits to do so. And we would collect the bird and collect a certain amount of information. This information included the name and date of the person who found the bird, but also the date it was collected, which route they were walking, north, south, or main quad, the time that they collected the bird, which building the bird was collected out, and in more detail, which window. Was it the windows that are primarily facing north, south, east, or west? And then we also recorded photos. And so all of this data was meant to be collected so that we can actually create now really interesting analyses of the data that we collected from all of these people to help identify problem areas on our campus. And so just some examples, these images might be a little frightening to some people, but these are a lot of the birds that we collected around campus, where each individual was able to be tracked and identified, both by species and through the tag that was collected. And then we collected all these birds and kept them in a freezer. And so some things that are probably popping out is there are some places where there are multiple birds, that are found in the same location. And these were often buildings that had really high impact, where there were often multiple birds found at the same place. And so just to give a different overview, we found hundreds of birds in 2019 during just the fall migration. So this is just a subset of the birds that we found. And hopefully you can appreciate the wide diversity and array of the different types of birds that were included during this 4-week period. And so these results from 2019 really provided robust evidence that birds are dying when flying over campus, and that more work is needed to fix this waste of wildlife. And so we also performed another strike survey again in the fall of 2020. We were planning one in the spring, of 2020, but those plans got put on hold for last year. But we performed the survey again in the fall. So now we have birds collected in 2019 and birds collected in 2020. But before I show you those data and how we analyze them, I want to take a moment to recognize all of the people who volunteered their time and effort to walking these surveys over 2 years. This is a long list of people who very willingly woke up early in the morning and stayed late at work in the evenings just to make sure that we could get the data to try to preserve these little feathered friends. And so to get deeper into the data, what this map shows, this map is a map of campus. And what it shows is the number of birds that were found at each location. So each circle represents a different building. The size of the circle and the color of the circle represent the number of window-killed birds found at that site. And so one of the buildings that hopefully jumps out at you in this figure is the one in the top, that's bright yellow, where we found over 150 birds at this one building location. And if you can see the label, it's Beckman Institute, which is this building that I showed you earlier. So also within these data, what we can look at is the variety of different birds that were found. And so I know you can't read them, but all the species that were identified from our survey are found along the bottom. And then the lollipops indicate the percent of birds that were found. And so the higher the lollipop, the longer the line, the more birds that were found of that species. And so as I said, I know you can't read these species names, but the point to really take away here is that there's several different types and species of birds that were collected during the survey. So it's not just that one species of bird is hitting, but there's a wide range of different types of migratory birds that are affected each year. And so hopefully what I've shown you at this point is that the University of Illinois buildings are causing bird fatalities over the 2 years that we collected data on bird strikes on campus. Gabe, our group, has identified which buildings are the most impactful, and that specific characteristics of certain windows can cause these collisions. So then the next question is, how can we reduce bird window strikes? And there have been attempts on campus where people recognize that certain windows are a problem, such as here, where somebody has put up a decal in this one window to try to stop or inhibit birds from running into the class. But what studies have shown is that this doesn't actually work, and that birds still continue to run into these windows. There are, however, other tested measures or modifications that can reduce these bird window strikes. So this is a company called Kaleidoscape that produces this mesh-like decal that goes over your windows. It's been approved and tested by the American Bird Conservancy, and it reduces 99% of bird window strikes. Up on in the right panel on the top, this is a view of what these decals look from the inside looking out. So they don't inhibit your view whenever you're inside of a room and looking outside. But whenever you're on the outside looking in, such as the bottom photo, it puts an opaque layer over the front of the window so that birds, as well as mammals clearly, won't run into them and will stop and see that's a solid structure rather than something to fly through. And so what we did was we wrote and applied for a grant and submitted it to the Student Sustainability Committee here on campus. We asked for $78,000 and we were awarded this grant primarily to retrofit Beckman Institute, which was that one building that had the majority of the birds hitting, to retrofit Beckman Institute with these kaleidoscope decals on the windows that were particularly dangerous. Included in this grant, we also want to now expand some of the impact that we can have on campus, not just for the birds, but also to help other undergrads and researchers here on campus. And so we also want to host a workshop to produce bird skins. Bird skins are the museum specimens that are stuffed to make presentations, but they can also be used for different studies, which is often the case for museum collections. And then with this workshop, both teaching people skills that they can use, we also want to donate the final product to the University of Illinois teaching collection here on campus. So the idea is that these birds, we're getting information from them, but hopefully that their loss of life can also help us to understand both the bird issues better, but also lead to other discoveries that will continue to add to the university. And so going back to Beckman, this is the specific walkway that is causing most of the issues that we've seen. And so this is a catwalk or a bridge connecting the front tower of Beckman to the main building. And one of the primary issues here is, as you can probably see, is you can see the tree on the other side through those glass windows. And so not only are these windows transparent, but they're also highly reflective, which gives it sort of that greenish tint to it when you look at it head on. And so this one location, this one bridge, was responsible for an estimated 400 bird deaths per year. And so our proposal is to now fix just this one bridge, primarily with the money we received from the Student Sustainability Committee. So whereas this currently is transparent and reflective, after the decals are placed, it would look more opaque, such as seen here, and reduce those bird deaths to 0 to 4 birds per year. But as I showed you on the map, this isn't the only building that is also being affected or also causing bird window shuts on campus. And so another one of these buildings is Morrill Hall, and Morrill Hall has this glass encased stairwell that we frequently find birds at. And so something that may not jump out to you immediately in this picture is at the very bottom, there's a bird on the ground, and that's actually a juvenile Cooper's hawk. It's one of the only raptors that we've actually found in this whole survey, but we found several birds, particularly at this stairwell. And so what we're proposing to do to fix this stairwell is use something called a Zen Curtain, where you use paracord or some other long, thin material to place lines across a window at regularly interspersed distances. So anywhere from 3 to 4 inches. 3 to 4 inches is tested to be the space in which birds do not think that they can fly through. So therefore they will just avoid the window altogether. And the money to put up this Zen Curtain on Morrill Hall was generously donated by the Champaign County Audubon Society, who's also been very supportive of this project and contributing funds to help keep it going. And so these are some other solutions that are available. It's not just the ones that we've shown. There are a lot of them out there, and this is a global problem, is having anthropogenic causes of buildings impacting birds through collisions. And so the main component to these decals or window modifications is making sure that they are spaced closely enough together so that the birds don't think that they can fly around whatever the decal is. So examples are like checkerboards that have regular patterns over them, or perhaps something a little more design friendly or aesthetically pleasing, such as these bird decals or the bird feathers seen on the right. But as this says, these are temporary solutions tested anywhere from 6 to 10 years. And so what we're hoping to do in the long run is to have the university instill long-term solutions. So these would include things such as acid etching in the glass or frosted panels that are frequent enough to inhibit birds from trying to fly into the glass. And so one of the ways that we're trying to approach these long-term solutions is by appealing both to the Board of Trustees here at the university, which we have presented some of this work to them back in March of 2020, which perhaps the presentation was a little lost on them at the time. But we're also hoping to work with other groups on campus to make these long-term changes, to put in regulations for new buildings going up that they must have long-term fixes or bird safe or bird friendly glass in them. And so some of the next steps associated with this project is to help the university become a bird friendly campus. We're already starting to put in regulations to be a leader in energy sustainability on campus, but we also want that to be extended to wildlife sustainability. And so something that our group has done is to put together this petition on change.org, where we already have over 700 signatures, which is aimed at implementing bird safe building policies at the University of Illinois. So in the long run, this petition is aimed at both awareness globally and in our campus community, but also to take that to higher up administrators to try to get this problem to be prevented in the first place with all the new buildings that are going up on campus. And the other aspect is currently we have a spring 2021 migration survey. So this will be our first spring survey. It actually began on April and it'll run through May 8th. So if you look out of your window now, you probably see a lot of beautiful birds out flying around or searching for food. And in this large bolus of migration in the spring, we anticipate that this will be another danger zone, or a danger period, just like the fall migration is. So this is currently actually being coordinated by a really promising undergrad, Colin Dobson, who played a huge role in the previous surveys that we performed. So he's now actually taking over performing these surveys in the future. I also want to bring some recognition to other people who have helped us with this project, primarily Brad Zerker and Julie Musette, both at the Illinois Natural History Survey. And these two actually pioneered the very first bird-friendly modifications here on campus. So Illinois Natural History Survey is another building on campus, and they recognized that they were having birds hit their windows. So they actually deployed two different types of window modifications, one being a Zen Curtain and the other being a different type of decal than we mentioned earlier. But they showed a noticeable difference and demonstrated that these window modifications here on campus can actually prevent bird window strikes. So what we're trying to do now is take their work that established this baseline for being able to prevent bird window strikes and expand that now to different buildings on campus. I also want to mention that Beckman Institute group, and specifically Director Jeff Moore, who has been very happy to work with us on this project. So what we, as I told you, we got that Student Sustainability Grant to modify Beckman, and they have been very receptive to listening to our data and our proposals and working with us to find a solution that everybody's happy with, both aesthetically from their perspective as an institute, but also from our perspective as a group who's interested in wildlife sustainability. We've also worked with the Architectural Review Committee, who has noticed this problem and who's willing to have discussions on how to approach making this a universal university policy. And then I also want to recognize some undergrad groups who have recently joined this project and have really taken a role in creating awareness for other campus members. So the first is a landscape architect group of students who are interested in this perspective from how can potential modifications to windows, but also to the environment around the buildings, help create a good environment for birds to thrive. And also the Wildlife Society student chapter here on campus, another RSO. And these students in this undergrad group were particularly interested in putting together that petition and really trying to get other people on campus to join in the cause. And so one of the final components that I really want to leave people with is that oftentimes bird collisions are perhaps thought to be associated with the large high rises in New York, or really large buildings where people may think that birds are flying into. But actually 98.8% of bird strike deaths, or roughly 592 million, occur at residences and low-rise buildings. So there's like a certain amount of height that most birds won't be able to, or that they will be flying in their pattern that aren't necessarily large as the other buildings that some videos have shown in the past, but it's actually mostly residences and buildings such as Beckman that are, five floors and smaller. And so with that, I just wanted to remind people again that it's important to preserve birds and these different populations and species for all of the ecosystem services that they perform. And if you're interested in more of these bird safe class solutions, there are 2 places where you can easily find more information. The first is ABC, the American Bird Conservancy, abcbirds.org, where they have glass collision modifications and suggestions, and also the brand that we're planning on using for Beckman, which is kaleidoscape.org, where they have both residential and commercial amounts of their decal available for purchase. And so that's the end of the talk. I'm really interested in having conversations and feedback from other people, and I'm happy to open it up for discussion for any other questions. I will also say one more time that my collaborator, Alec, is here. He is primarily the bird specialist. But I'm also happy to do my best at answering any questions we have.
Yeah, thank you so much. It looks like we do have a few questions in the chat, and actually Alec has been jumping into to answer some too. But I think the first ones we're looking at whether or not decreases in insect population might be to some extent affecting the decreases we see in bird populations as well.
That's a good question. So is this based off the insect Armageddon studies that recently come out? I don't know what proportion of birds are insectivores. So my guess is it would have something to do with those specific species that are primarily feeding on insects. But that might be a question for more of a bird specialist. That's a really interesting question from a sustainability perspective.
Yeah, there's some evidence that birds have been in decline, especially insectivores, and that's coincided with a lot of the insect loss. But it's hard to know for sure because of climate change and a lot of other factors. But a lot of birds like barn swallows, tree swallows, these aerial insectivores have been in decline for quite a while, and it's thought that that correlates pretty strongly with the insect population also declining.
Yeah, and it looks like we also had some questions about the energy efficiency, the effect of that on the window treatments.
Yeah, so I don't know off the top of my head, Alec may, about the degree of energy efficiency, but that is a huge benefit to also using these decals. So a lot of the glazing that goes on windows, that's what it's for. But that glazing is also what increases bird collisions. And so the idea is that these decals that that increase energy efficiency but reduce bird collisions are sort of a 2-in-1 ability to increase, an environmental and sustainable awareness. Alec, do you know off the top of your head what level of energy efficiency the Kaleidoscape decals have?
Oh, I don't have numbers, but I know that it's supposed to be pretty significant because these decals will deflect a lot of infrared light, which causes heating. So it should reduce cooling costs quite a bit.
So these decals like originate as energy efficiency things, and then you notice the decrease in window strikes, or were they originally designed to decrease window strikes?
They were specifically designed to decrease bird window collisions.
That's really cool. And then there was another question about asking when you saw most of in your studies, was there a higher proportion of birds found in the morning or in the evenings? Because you did the 2 walkthroughs, right? Was there any data on that?
Yeah, primarily in the morning. So there are birds that migrate overnight, so they don't necessarily use light signals to see to migrate. So a lot of them were found, most of them were found in the morning. The other side of that is we probably only found a portion of the birds that are actually colliding with windows because of scavengers. So if you've been on campus, you probably noticed that there's a lot of squirrels all over campus who are major foragers on birds that have collided. And so they tend to be more active in the late morning and throughout the day. And so the afternoon birds were probably more predated than the morning birds. I don't know off the top of my head if different birds migrate at different times of day as well. So unknown if it's based off of when the birds are migrating or predation. But we did find more in the morning. Yeah.
And we also used the eBird website has a migration map, so you can actually look up the strength of migration for a given period. You can actually look this up right now too if you wanted to see. I'm sure if there are a lot of birders in this group right now that they know about this or they'd like to know about this, but there's a migration map on eBird where you can see the number of birds migrating based off of radar data. And anecdotally, whenever we'd go out the morning after night where the whole map was red all around Champaign, Illinois, we'd find a lot more birds. So
That's really good. That was ebird.org. Is that the?
I'll find the link and I'll share it in our chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. And then we had another question here asking if any of this data could be used to assess how various bird species visual perceptions differ. If you see more species colliding with windows, or do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, so this is.
You can go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that you're the expert in this exact field, and that Alec is collaborating with the American Bird Conservancy to try to be able to actually measure windows and then use visual modeling information from birds to assess whether or not glass is potentially dangerous before it even goes in a building. So I think you can elaborate on that more.
Yeah. So it's hard to say whether some birds are more susceptible than others just based off their vision. A lot of it has to do with their flight patterns. So we get a lot of warblers at Beckman because they tend to like to jump from tree to tree as they're moving along. And there's a path of trees that goes directly into the catwalk at Beckman. So they're going along a tree line looking for another tree and they see this reflection and that's where they're hitting. A lot of smaller birds tend to be the victims of window collisions because their vision doesn't tend to be as acute as larger birds. So if you think of bird eyes as cameras, which is essentially how they work, the bigger the camera lens, the better the acuity of the bird's vision. So smaller lenses means that these birds can't see in focus further than about 10 feet out. And that tends to be the distance at which they can make a decision whether or not to fly into the window. So a lot of patterns that have been designed to deter birds from hitting these windows are often too small or too far apart for the birds to actually pick out the details of the pattern. So they tend to blend. So if any of you are nearsighted and you take off your glasses and try to look at something, that's kind of what a bird sees if they're too far away from these windows.
And then I guess that kind of goes into my question. So you categorized the different species of birds and it seemed like some of them were significantly higher. Are those birds that you saw that were hitting the windows more, are they just more populous? Are they more local birds, or are there more of them around, or is it specifically those birds are more susceptible to running into these windows?
It's a combination. So Swainson's thrushes are they're actually night migrants. So they come through and it's much darker. And I think a lot of the collisions that the Swainson's thrushes end up becoming victims to are thinking they can fly through a building at night and seeing through the windows as transparent and getting confused there. But I would say a lot of the representation in this graph here is just which birds are most common migrating through. but there is some differences based off of their behaviors and when they're flying.
If anyone else has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can throw them in the chat. Yes, it does look like no penguins.
I'm also really interested from other observers or around town that are here, other participants, if they've noticed this at all in general around their own houses or just around town before. Something that we're sort of learning as we talk more about this project is that people see it, but they don't really make the connection about why the bird is there or that it's perhaps due to a collision with a window building. Even people at Beckman who maybe see multiple birds a day, they just sort of feel like, oh, that's sad. And then they walk in and never really make the connection about what the cause is. And so I'm always interested in whether other people notice this trend or perhaps around migration time, especially in other parts of Illinois, just outside of campus.
Yeah, I don't know about anyone else, but personally, like our offices in the IGB have large windows along the side, and I've never like thought about this as a long-term scale or large scale issue, but we have had birds collide next to our desks, basically in some of the offices. The ones that I've seen actually survived. They like collided with the window and then stood back up and were. But it's definitely a experience to have something just collide into the side of the window.
Are they on the side by all those berry bushes, sort of towards that little parking area?
So I'm in the gatehouse building, so it's on the north side, in like the walkway between the IGB and I think there's a sorority house next door that I can't think of the name of.
Yeah, I think Claudia's told me that she's heard them there too before. And I think there's several berry type trees or bushes out there that a lot of birds will like sort of hang out and eat off, and then they try to take off, or sort of they bypass the tree and plan on coming back and sort of just thud into the window.
There's a few more stories of people who had a bird fly into the open window in a classroom, just land in there.
Yeah, that's true. So a lot of the, there was a comment in there, a lot of the birds, we found several that were alive, not as many as were dead. But the anticipation is even if they flew off, they probably had some sort of brain hemorrhage and died later on. So even though that there are birds that do bounce off and survive, unknown about their long-term survivability after the event. Yeah. So I think a lot of the ones that we're talking about around this berry bush are robins, and they think at most are flying maybe between the trees and the windows 3 feet. So I've checked there on multiple occasions and haven't found any dead, but the other ones, the smaller migratory birds that we find that are still alive to some degree are probably not going to survive in the long run.
Another thing you mentioned that I had never thought of before is I didn't realize that squirrels would, I didn't think about other animals that would scavenge from different dead birds. Like I didn't think about all those local animals too. Because squirrels,
Presumably cats too.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. One of the birds that we had in the slideshow was partially predated. I realize now that if there were kids on or something, we probably should have taken that out, but it was just a really obvious occasion where there was a dead bird and it was half eaten.
Yeah. There was a question here about your thoughts on whether or not light pollution and reflection play a role on the collision of birds in these ones.
Sarah, you should be able to speak to this more than me. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on it first.
I would think that there's definitely some component to it. I think that a lot of buildings on campus are typically well lit all the time. And I know one benefit of COVID, at least where I am, is that some of the large fields on campus that are typically used for sports fields or other buildings are not lit as they normally would be when people are on campus. And so I know that's not really in the areas that you guys are serving, but yeah, I'm just curious if, maybe reduction of some of that light on campus has been beneficial to, allowing birds safe passage over the university during migration as opposed to stopping and maybe having some of those accidental collisions. But I honestly don't have a lot of metrics about light pollution on campus in specific. So just curious what you guys thought.
Yeah, I don't know, because my guess is that for the night migrators, they're not orienting to light. So having lights on would have to cause a diversion from the path that they're already on if they're overnight. And I don't know how likely that is. Clearly the light pollution and in other ways, birds that orient to the light become very exhausted and ultimately don't survive in the long run because of that. But I don't know if that would be a strong enough, specifically just talking about migration here, if that would be a strong enough stimulus to override the migratory path that they're already on to divert them to a building. But that's a good question. I have no idea. Alec, do you have any inclinations?
About the light pollution?
Yeah, and whether or not that creates a higher impact during migration.
It definitely does. So in New York City, they often had lights beaming up into the sky for whatever debut of a film, or somebody wanted to have a fancy night and make a big scene. And a lot of times birds will be drawn to lights, and some of the birds in New York would actually fly into light beams and circle around them until they died of exhaustion and fell out of the sky. And in Chicago, it became such an issue with drawing the birds into the city that were migrating along Lake Michigan, that the city finally decided to do something about it. And so they have lights out in Chicago. And I think this was led by the Chicago bird monitors, which they did surveys around Chicago to find where birds were hitting. And they got the city to actually turn off lights below, I think, 100 feet or there's something like that. But they turn off a lot of their lights during the migration periods every year now to reduce the number of birds coming into the city.
So one of the new buildings that's going up that we showed earlier that has a lot of glass, we're working with them. It's a new building. It's not even open yet, but we're working with them because they're already experiencing bird strikes and are aware of the problem. And that's one of the major solutions. In the meantime, until we can actually modify the windows, is turn off the lights and put down the curtains so that the birds don't view the windows as a transparent object. Do you think that those are two different issues though? Light pollution as for like one subset of the population and migration as another factor for building windows, or that they're synergistic and that together they cause more?
Probably together, right? So the lights are drawing birds into the city area in the early morning or in the night, and then maybe when the sun comes up and they start moving around a little more, if they came in to take a break, they'll fly, more likely to fly into windows if they're surrounded by buildings. But also at night, they can be disoriented and blinded by the lights as they're flying.
Kathy, who was saying that they have bird feeders 10 feet from the window, but some collisions, is talking about adding in a Zen curtain. And that was, we have a family member who had a similar issue. And so there are websites available, if you don't already know of them, to be able to make a Zen curtain easily and rather cheaply, like with paracord or something like that. If you're interested in those resources, I think we can share probably the website that also shows you how to make one on your own. I don't remember the site off the top of my head. These are great questions. I'm glad Alec's here. Again, I study honeybees and molecular biology, so I'm doing my best here to to mediate the bird window collision world.
So yeah, I was just looking at this Dark Sky Week. It's a really cool link they have in the chat. So was there specific timings that are involved in that? Or I guess, can you talk about what the goal of that is to decrease the lights to prevent birds from being drawn into the residential windows too? Is that correct?
Yeah, Sarah?
Sorry, I'm cooking dinner. Yeah, I'm absolutely not here to take over this presentation either because you did an excellent job. But yeah, I did put a link in there as, you know, we're working on this initiative, kind of like hoping with all of these great groups on campus that are trying to do big things, just promote that through migration period, at least in the spring and in the fall, that people try to limit their light pollution as much as possible. And that's primarily through migration season, but also, you know, all year round to try to find alternatives to bright lights that really, you know, put that light pollution out into the atmosphere, up into the sky where birds and bats and insects and all sorts of creatures are moving and migrating and living their nocturnal lives. So primarily it's just a collaborative effort to get people who are doing work in this region, in this area, to bring awareness to lights out initiatives and dark sky initiatives, and about our dark sky park in town, which is at Middle Fork Preserve. So yeah, I think it just ties in really well with, you know, obviously birds are being drawn in at night and hitting windows. And I think there's an obvious connection with the amount of light that cities emit that's drawing them in. So thanks.
That's awesome. I guess, does anyone else, are there any other questions we have? If not, thank you so much for sharing this with us. It was very interesting, exciting to learn about this. Definitely something to think about. I'm going to look into signing the pledge now.
Yeah, you should absolutely sign the petition. Well, thanks for inviting us, Danny, and thanks for everyone who attended, for listening to our, you know, this passion project that we have. It's been heartbreaking and heartwarming to see all the people who are willing to also, you know, rally around the project idea at the same time.
Awesome. Thanks again, and thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you in May for our last talk of the semester.
Thanks, everyone.